Hello everyone and welcome. We're going to be taking a look at logical functions this week. We're going to take a look at the if statement specifically for most of our examples. I'll bring up the spreadsheet in a moment. We'll show you some examples. But first I want to break down the if, and then we're going to move on to the and then finally the or statement in several examples this week. So here's a basic breakdown in the if is what the if does is it looks at a logical test. In other words, it uses a comparison operator to compare two values, in this case numbers, as you can see on the screen. And what it will do is it'll determine whether the value is true or false and return some value that you specify based on that true or false. So really quick example of what this looks like. I'm going to do a really quick if statement here. And we're going to equals if. So my logical test, I'm going to take a look at B, and I'm going to ascertain whether that is greater than A3. Now obviously B3 is going to be greater, right? So if the value is true, I'm going to ask Excel to return true. And if it's false, I'm going to ask it to return false and close parentheses. Now notice a couple of things here. You can pass different types of data in the true or false statements. In this case, I'm passing text data. Now, if you try to pass text data, you have to put it in quotation marks, as you can see here. Right? So let's take a look. And of course, this is going to be true because 75 is greater than 56. Now, let's take a look at another example. Let's do if. And let's do another logical test and say if this is less than 56, right? B4 is greater than A4. Now, obviously, that is true. So what are we going to return this time? Well, we could do any number of things. We could return values or we could return text. In this case, I'm going to do text again. Remember to put it in quotation marks. So you can see a really quick comparison of the two formulas where you return a true or a false. Now in the second part of the video, we're going to look at how to pass some numbers and how to pass some formulas. So let's take a look at our spreadsheet. Okay, so here we're going to look at a couple of iterations of the if statement. Remember that you can pass a couple of different things through the if statement. In other words, you can return different types of data. One, you can return text. Another, you can return the contents of a cell. You can return a formula. Or later in the course, we'll teach you how to do nested statements. So let's take a quick look. Here we have the scenario. We have somebody trying to get into a business program. And you have to have a GPA of 3.5 or better to get into the program, and 3.6 or better to get a scholarship. Now the or better is important because you're going to be using a different type of comparison operator than we've shown you so far. So let's take a look and see if Sally gets into the program. Now I'm going to demonstrate using the insert function, and then I'm going to write a couple of these as well. You may find that you like actually writing these more than the insert function once you get used to using the if statement. So let's look at our logical statement. We're going to see if Sally's GPA is greater than or equal to, right? That's the important operator because you can have a 3.5 and still make it into the program. Let's see, the hurdle for acceptance, so B4. Now, I'm just going to click on the value of true. And if the value is true, I'm just going to put in yes. And if it's false, I'm going to put no. Now notice you don't have to worry about quotation marks when you use the insert function because Excel recognizes this as text and just puts the quotations around them. That's not always true when you're writing a function, and it can throw you some interesting errors. So you can see Sally gets in her program, and let's test it out. If she has a 3.50, she still gets in, but a 3.49 is the line on that. So you can pass text through the if statement. You can also pass the scholarship amount, whether she actually qualifies for the scholarship amount or not. I am going to use another insert function. Oops, cancel. Let me cancel that. Let's try a if statement first. Looks like I had one already written. All right. Well, let's try one more time. There we go. Let's do the insert function, the if. And we're going to logical test this time as if the Sally's GPA is greater than or equal to the GPA hurdle. We're going to see that that's false. The value of true, we're going to pass as scholarship amount. So you can reference another cell, and that'll pass 5,000 on to B7. If not, we're going to pass a number. So notice we can pass a cell reference or a hard code, a number into it. So let's take a look. It looks like Sally's getting 0 in this case. Let's take a look if she goes the 3.60. Now we've passed. We passed on the $5,000. You can see that this statement up here turned yes. So based on the contents of B1. So this is a way you can pass two different types of information, right? You can pass text and you can pass the cell reference. Now let's go ahead and move on to passing one of two values in two different cells. So here you have the scenario, you're looking at personnel evaluations and basing some sort of yearly bonus on that evaluation. So we're going to pass one of two cell values into cell B24. So again, let's go ahead and use the insert function. And we're going to click OK and accept the F. There we go. And our logical test, of course, is going to be the evaluation score. So if your evaluation score is greater than, we'll call it equal to, the evaluation score goal, then the value of true is you get the higher bonus, which is in cell B21. And if not, you get to B22. And you can already see that we're going to return a value of 3,000, which is a great thing about doing the using the insert function box. So let's take a look. Let's see if we have a 4.00. Looks like you get the higher bonus, and that's because it's greater than or equal to. Or 5. So that's a way to pass either one of two cell values. Now we've seen where you can pass text, and we've seen where you can pass one or two cell values. But here's where real kind of power starts to display when it comes to using formulas within those arguments. So in this case, we have a sales goal of $50,000 for salespeople. And if you're under $50,000 in sales commission, you get 4%. And if you're over, you get 3%. So let's take a look at Ken and Betty's commission. Again, we're going to do the insert function. We're going to use if. And our logical test is going to be, since we're in Ken's area, we're going to say, well, if B43 is over, and we'll assume it's equal the sales goal, right? So the value, if this is true, is going to be a formula, because you're going to take Ken's sales and multiply that if it's true. So if you're over the $50,000 sales commission, then you're going to multiply that by 4%, or that value that is in cell B41. If that is true, if I'm not over the sales goal, then I'm going to take again B43 times the lower commission, so the B42. So it looks like I'm going to be about $1,350. And we already have that formatted. So let's take a look at Betty's commission, who actually was over the sales goal. And we're looking at pretty much the same formula. We're going to do a logical test that if Betty's is over or equal to the sales goal, if that value is true, we're going to pass Betty times the higher commission, and if it's false, we're going to pass Betty times the lower commission. So you can see obviously the value of true is going to be a better result. Now if Betty was to be was right around Ken's, then she would get about the same thing. She would get about the same thing as Ken. So you can see there's several different ways to pass these different types of information through the if statement. and this becomes pretty powerful once you combine them. You can combine nested statements and sophisticated formulas. You can even include other functions within functions. It's called nested functions, but we'll take a look at that another time. So let's take a look at one more function that is similar to the if. It's called the and. Two functions, the and the or. Our next section explores the and the or statements. We're going to look at these statements really quickly just to break them down, then I'll show you some examples. So unlike the if statement, there are just several arguments. As a matter of fact, you can have lots and lots of arguments that you pass, but both the and the or return a true or false result that can then be used in a nested statement, usually an if. So the and arguments returns a true or false, and the or arguments return a true or false. The difference is that to have a true result with the and statement, then all the statements have to be true, right? With the or statement, to return a true result, only one of the two or more arguments have to be true. So let's take a look at this. It's a lot easier to see it in action rather than to sort of talk through it. So let's take a look. So here we just have a real simple table. We're actually going to approve or deny a prospect, probably extending some sort of loan or something like that, based on a couple of conditions or conditions. So let's look at the and statement first. So in the and conditions for these, we're going to approve the prospect if the prospect has over 5 years at their current employer and are a low risk. So all these conditions have to be true to return a true statement. So let's take a look at writing the statements. So we're going to begin as usual with the equal sign and an and, open parentheses. And you can see in the breakdown here, you see that the logical argument 1, logical argument 2, and so forth. As a matter of fact, you can see we're on logical 1 because logical 1 is bold at the moment. So what's our first condition? Our first conditions are if the prospect has over 5 years. So we're going to say, well, years at current employer. And we're going to say if, greater than, and we're going to hard code 5. So if that number is over 5, we're going to have a true statement. Let's move on to our second argument. Our second argument takes a look at this credit risk area and says, okay, is this low or high? And in this case, you're going to do equal, and we're going to put in this. Let's see. In parentheses, remember, because you're looking at text. So we're passing two kinds of arguments here. We're doing a logical comparison. C2 is greater than 5, right? And E2 has to equal low. So both these conditions have to be met to have a true result. And of course, in this case, we're going to have a false result. And I'm going to just move this down. All right, we're going to apply this to the entire area. And sure enough, we can see that either, in this case, one of these conditions is not met. The year at current employer, you get a false, and only one of these conditions actually meet the standard for true. So at the moment, it doesn't seem that useful, right? You just get a true or a false, but we're going to add, this is a nested statement in a moment. First, however, let's take a look at the or statement. And why don't we go through the insert function dialog for this one. Let's take a look at the or. And we're going to click OK. Now remember that either of these conditions can be met to be true, right? One or the other, thus the or statement. So similarly, we're going to look at C2, and we're going to say if this is over 5, and let's go to our second logical argument. If the credit risk equals low. And actually, in this case, you are going to have to add the quotation marks, just like you did in the when you're writing the function in the by hand. So let's take a look. Looks like we're going to be true here because one of these conditions are met. Right? I'm going to go ahead and apply this down the column, and you can see the differences in the and the or. Right? Your conditions are if over 4 years or low risk. Right? Only if both conditions are not met do you get a false. So you can see the difference. Here you have false in the second record for the and statement, but a true statement for the or. Again, it doesn't seem as useful until you start to nest statements. And this is where these statements get pretty powerful. So if we want to return some sort of text as to whether we approve a prospect or we deny a prospect, we can now nest these and or statements. So, excuse me, let's go ahead and so to nest something, we're going to start with the if statement, right? And just like normal, we put an open parentheses. Now, it looks confusing, but take a look at the logical test area. You see where it's bold, right? So just think I'm just in an if statement. And right now, that's our entire argument, right? So to move on to whether it's the value of true or false, we're going to put a comma, right? So as you can see, we have the open parentheses if, so we haven't finished the if statement yet, but we have finished the first portion of the if statement, right? We already have the first portion of the if statement is the and statement, and we know that and statement is going to return false. We already know that. Now we can say, look, if this statement is true, we're going to approve this person, right? And if it's false, we're going to return deny prospect. Okay, and we're going to close parentheses and take a look. Look at that. We're going to deny that prospect because the two conditions of the two arguments in the and statement result in false, right? And that's embedded within this large if statement. It can be really confusing at first. I completely understand. It takes a little bit of practice, but I think if you go through this iteration a couple of times, you'll really get the hang of it. Now let's see what happens if I try and apply it. Uh-oh, what happened? Well, we have all these zeros that should be returning something, correct? Well, remember one of our first lessons had to do with absolute references. So one of the things we're going to have to do as you move down this list, you can see that E14, 13 and 14 change to E14 and 15. So it doesn't really reference the correct cells. So we're going to make these absolute references. Just hover over the cell reference and press F4, and you get those little money signs. Remember that? Now, every time we move down within the column, we're still going to be referencing E13 and E14. So now if we reapply this, there we go. So again, we have approved prospect. We've passed this approved prospect through the if statement by using the and statement. Let's apply this to an or as well and see how it's different. So let's go ahead and do the insert function again. Okay, and we have the or statement. We're going to do if, remember, and we started the argument, right? We already know this is going to return something true and false, so we've already made our logical argument. So all I have to do now is add a comma and move on to the value of true. If the value is true, we're going to have approved prospect. And if the value is false, we're going to have deny. And we're going to close that. Now, of course, we already know, based on some trial and error, that we need to make these absolute references. And we're going to apply this down. And you can see the differences, right? On some of these, for example, we would have denied this with an and statement, but we would approve it with an or statement. As a matter of fact, you can see with the or, you have far more approved prospects. So nested statements can be really confusing at first, but if you practice, they'll become second nature. You get used to moving around in those arguments.